Welcome. We are talking to Dr. Evan Ortlieb. He's at St. John City, and I'm Peggy Semingson at University of Texas at Arlington. All views on this podcast about teaching online are our own. And I asked Evan to talk with us just about, what are you thinking about this whole situation of this rapid online? And then later we'll talk about our bigger ideas about the issues beyond crisis mode. So what are your thoughts about what people need to know?
Yeah, so thank you for this opportunity. First off, Peggy, I really appreciate our talks and just thinking about these topics as we're at sort of a point of precipice, right? A crisis is happening with the coronavirus, and then how are universities reacting rather than maybe being more preventative in preparing themselves for the future in online education in general. So some of the things that we've been dealing with over at St. John's are both faculty who are unprepared to teach in the online setting and have not gone through those sorts of training modules and workshops. And then secondly, for face-to-face programs that now have to be re-envisioned in this online space, and what does that look like? Right. And so some of the things that I've been trying to work with some folks there about are, how do we make the most of audio video technologies in general, right? So, years and years ago, back when I was in college, I would often use a tape recorder just to be able to listen back to a lecture that my geography professor gave, almost as a study habit or a study tool. And so now we have that ability in the online space because our lectures or our talks are recorded. And so I see it in many ways as an opportunity to record our thoughts as professors, edit those as needed, but if you don't have that skill set, you can just put it out there like that, and really create more of dialogic conversation around the topics in those lectures, because the definition of a lecture is sort of a one-way street, right? And I think that through audio video technologies, we can rewind, we can pause, we can watch again, we can reflect, we can do all those things that make it much more of a two-way street. And so I'm hoping that people see that as a necessary change or shift, but also as an opportunity to really get more at that dialogic structure of conversation and communication.
It's funny you say that, and it's funny that we're literacy professors, because it's not just about reading text anymore. And that's the message in my ideas about this too, and I've always thought we need multimedia, but how do you enable people to dialogue if it is a one-way? About that.
No, it's so true. When we think about the language arts in general, right? So speaking, listening, reading and writing and so on, all of us have those modes that we're most comfortable with, those modes that are most developed, but that doesn't mean that we don't need to stretch ourselves in those other ways. So I remember years and years ago, I was not as an attuned listener, right? So I would practice in different settings, the coffee shop, church, one-on-one with my partner, et cetera, et cetera. And by doing that practice, I think I'm a better listener today, right? And mindful of what the other person is doing instead of thinking about what I should speak of next. So I think, when it comes to the language arts and then audio video technologies, they really permit us to do more and position us to thrive, perhaps more so than in a traditionally face-to-face climate.
Right. And what I love is people can, I'm a huge mobile fan, is students can listen while they're doing something else and maybe pay more attention to it when they can focus.
That's a good point.
Flexibility. So let me ask you this, related to multimedia, audio, video, what are some great tools that you use? I know you do a lot of this type of stuff and you dialogue with people and you do yourself on video. What do you recommend?
Yeah, so I think a good sort of starting point is just to use, some kind of video software, such as we're using right now, Zoom, WebEx, Panopto, VoiceThread, et cetera, et cetera. There are many options out there. I would start with the free ones. Why not? The price is right. And then from there, kind of see which ones that you prefer for different reasons. The ones that are most nimble, where you can record and dump that file onto your desktop and upload it to YouTube or a Blackboard or Canvas portal, what have you. I like those, such as the one we're using, Zoom. But I think we have to remember that whether it be video, audio, or any other sort of mode, it doesn't have to be perfect, right? So
I
no
love it.
lecture live is going to be flawless, and no lecture
Right.
online or through digital technologies is that way either. But
It's
by
true.
leaving it not perfectly polished, it really presents the real self, right? So we'll stumble across words sometimes. We're not going to know the exact precise word to use always, but it shows the real self, and it shows that we're trying to make efforts in this space. I will say that I think the most important thing with respect to audio video technologies is to have a clear and articulate audio stream.
Yes, you have
So even more than video,
microphone. Yeah.
even more than video, you have to be legible, right? Or you have to be audible to other people.
Right.
And because some people are going to be in spaces where the internet isn't as fast as others, perhaps rural areas, perhaps other countries, etc. And so the better audio quality that we can attain and preserve to be able to reuse semester after semester.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like going back to radio. Yeah. Yeah, if you have no audio, it's useless.
For sure. So I think a good video a stream. I also think just audio, some podcasts are a good change of pace. I try to make 3 to 5 minute podcasts that are just audio to be able to upload in various weeks throughout the semester. And those audio clips could just be me talking about a topic just from an evidence-based perspective, but it could also be interviews that I do, let's say with the textbook author, and that could be video or audio. It could be with an outside expert such as yourself or somebody else in the field on that given topic of the week. Let's say we're talking about fluency. We might bring in Chase Young. We might bring in Tim Rosinski, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that permits learners to glean from multiple teachers. And so it's not just the textbook author. It's not just the instructor of record. It's not just their peer, but it's outside experts that we can bring into those online spaces that generally is much more complicated to do in a face-to-face environment.
Right. That's so true. We can always benefit from other voices. Well, great. So, and then another point, you have these 3 A's, AV technology, activities, active learning, and assessment. So can you tell us about that second bullet point? Like, how do we?
Sure. So I think the biggest challenge when it comes to thinking about what online teaching and learning looks like is that some people don't have experience there. And so there are trepidations, there are fears about what does it look like. And I think one thing that we can do to try to break down those barriers to that space is to offer up help with respect to what activities look like in an online space. So for example, I tried a new activity this past semester with a mixed methods research class I was teaching, where the first week of the semester, I had them do a group activity where we basically did a jigsaw of an article that was really rich and deep. And I knew it was too much for them to sort of get through all by themselves. So instead, each group of 2 people focused on a section of the article. And then they made a 3-minute video describing what that section was like and sort of relating to their personal experience. So some of them presented that where one person did the talking, one person wrote the script. Other ones did a dialogic conversation about that topic.
Oh, I like that.
All of those were uploaded to the VoiceThread portal, where people could basically go through and look at different sections in the videos that people created of each. And I thought that was, I thought it was going to be an opportunity to collaborate effectively even in the first week. But honestly, it was a little bit of a challenge for them to collaborate synchronously when it's an asynchronous program. So sometimes you have to kind of stretch the people, learn as you go. There's always going to be pluses and minuses involved, but I wanted to try something new. And I think that jigsaw activity that works so well in a face-to-face environment can indeed be replicated in the online world.
I just want to say, I like your idea of nudging. Is that what you would say?
Exactly.
Yeah. And then there's that idea in online about just-in-time learning. So if a student did get stuck, you're probably on standby to give them some support. Is that true?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, feedback is sort of a double-edged sword for me. I try to provide immediate feedback
Yeah.
And then when students are in other classes, they have that same expectation that
Yeah.
might not always be met perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they'll typically get some feedback from me probably within 5 or 10 minutes, honestly, which might be too fast because sometimes the problems could figure itself out over a couple
Right.
hours.
They figure
But I
it
would
out.
definitely recommend trying to get feedback within 24 hours within an online space, if at all possible, knowing that their success is predicated in large part from that feedback and from getting past that moment where you said they were stuck to continue on with that. Because, for example, let's say that it's an asynchronous class, they have a family, they have they work full time, and they dedicate, let's say, Thursday and Friday night to doing their homework. Well, let's say Thursday night they get a question and you don't respond till Monday. There's going to be some hurdles involved with trying to get back, on board with that learning process. So I think feedback and as immediate as possible is probably the way to go.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, I love active learning too, and I tend to encourage my students to do multimodal and that kind of thing. Let's talk about assessments. So some of the ways, beyond discussion boards and beyond quizzes.
Yeah. So like you said, it's very commonplace that people get, they upload a PDF of an article. They say, oh, do a discussion board. Well, I don't know if that ever worked, even though that was perhaps the primary way of doing it 10 to 15 years ago. So I like to keep my assessments holistic, right? So I want some voice threads or discussion boards. I might have one quiz. I might have a project that's collaborative as well as independent. I might have other short assignments where it might be 500-word essays as responses to topics that we're learning about. And then I also typically have them create video responses on a regular basis within VoiceThread underneath the Blackboard portal that we currently use at St. John's, because I think that we need to be prepared to articulate our opinions and our thoughts on issues in the video space and not just one-off. And this is what I mean by one-off. Let's say you do a response to the teacher, he or she reads it, and then it's proverbially thrown into the garbage can at that point. I like the responses to live in the ether, right? So if we're talking about a topic, let's say the science of reading instruction or literacy instruction, which is a hot topic right now, why can't that opinion, if and when it's evidence-based and so on and so forth, why can't you post that on YouTube? Why can't you post that to where not only I see it but your peers in class? Why can't you do projects where you create blogs or websites to articulate your vision and the services that you provide to your community of readers? I think through those sort of more dynamic assessments, oneself can truly show and sort of establish, which is what you're always talking about. You can establish your professional profile and identity in the online space.
And you can help, you're modeling for other people.
Exactly.
Sounds like this idea of open pedagogy.
For sure. I think, as much as we can glean from the internet and other experts around us, we need to participate in that conversation so that they can learn from us just the same.
That's true. Like, you never know who will benefit from this video. Like, maybe someone is like, I've had enough of this. I just want to know how to log in. And other people are like, I hadn't thought of that.
Exactly. And sometimes, they'll post, kind comments on YouTube posts or whatever else. I know I've made some videos recently on educational research, and particularly in the mixed methods world where there's not so many videos out there and there's not so much information. And I know I've gotten a lot of good feedback from people all over the world saying, you know what, I was really looking for a design that would be able to do X and Y, and I really appreciate you sharing that info with me.
Yeah, and that's authentic. Yeah, that's great. I've gotten the same thing. Like, you find a niche topic and it fills a need.
Exactly.
That's great. So for me, assessment, I like the dialogue focus. You said I use self checklists where they go through and kind of check their own, like you were saying, sometimes things work out on their own before they ask you. So self checklists help, especially with large scale classes.
That's smart.
You don't get 1,000 emails. And then I do participatory assignments where they kind of get credit for doing it. It's not graded as harshly.
Sure.
And then I do ungraded. So the ungraded is harder to account for, but just asking them to do things like post in a back channel that I have on Teams or something like that.
Mm-hmm. You said on Teams, do you use Microsoft Teams?
I do, and so I had to get them used to it, and then I've been using it regularly. And then I don't know how it's going to work with the shift to online. Probably just be more of a Q&A board.
Got it. So can I ask you quickly, we're shifting right now to Microsoft Teams, and I just started getting into that space. How are your students liking that so far?
They like it. It took a little bit of, adapting. I think it helps when multiple instructors are using it.
Okay.
And then they have to have a reason to use it. So we use it at a set time. I think it's great for doing live conferencing. And it also has a lot of interactivity. So there's apps within your class that you can activate. So I've been doing polling as one thing, as an asynchronous way to engage. I'm just learning more about it. So
I like that. And I think you're one of those people who, if there's a new app that comes out, you're not afraid to give it a go. Go ahead and implement, tease out what are the pros and cons, and really be a trendsetter in that regard. So I appreciate your leadership.
I'll tell you, my honest feedback is I love it because it has a mobile app. If it didn't have a mobile app, I probably wouldn't love it as much.
Sure.
Students can also write you through the chat and get that instant feedback, and you can turn it into a video conference if needed.
Okay.
So that's helpful instead of having to log into your laptop.
Got it.
I think that's it. Do you want to mention any of your general interests beyond this situation?
Yeah, sure. I think, this is really starting to, sort of whet my curiosities around how do we make sure that everybody has access to high quality learning opportunities during crises like this. So like I said before, people with limited internet connection speed, or people with older computers and hardware, right? So sometimes the hardware limits it just as much as the bandwidth. And really trying to make sure that our online teaching and learning is ADA compliant. So if we shoot a video, do we also provide the transcript or the script for that video? That's always important when you have people who have different challenges, whether they have hearing loss, whether they have a visual situation where they can't see as well as we can. So it's really important to think about all learners in this space and not just your typical one. I think another thing that I'm trying to work on is what are those opportunities in asynchronous environments that perhaps are better or more highly equipped for student success than synchronous opportunities to learn from. So for me, it opens up realms around reflection, true reflection over time, and not just you have 5 minutes to reflect in a class, but you have the next 5 days to really reflect on these ideas we talked about.
Yeah.
Because I think when it comes to reflections and asynchronous learning, that we're able to connect between, right, those old like connections to text and self and the world or whatever. But I think that really comes true in the online space where we have time and where something might be due a week or two from now, and we can really situate our thinking around that. I know I'm always looking at different books, different topics here. I have one right here, Pursuing Opportunities Through Partnerships, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm always trying to think about how do we engage with the community in different ways, especially in this asynchronous space. So those are some of the things I'm looking at right now.
Oh, that's great. I'm kind of like you, I value networks. And so this lately, I've been thinking about online for a long time. I've always thought we need to shift the culture to one of digital transformation. I've never understood why it's seen as optional, and obviously no, it's not. So this is like a big awakening for a lot of people. And I hope that if and when this passes, that this isn't all forgotten. So
sure. Yeah, I think it's important that, whether we learn from our mistakes or whether we learn from this moment in time, it's critical that we actually make sustained gains from this opportunity that's
exactly. Maybe make some more intact plans or whatever. And then my other big thing I'm interested in is preparing pre-service teachers to integrate technology and innovations, and also to help them see themselves as online teachers. Maybe they want to teach virtually. Those things as options and possibilities down the road.
That's a great point. I think, when we think about teaching, we also think about those other side hustles like tutoring and those other kind of spaces where people or the SAT or the ACT
Right.
or the MCAT or getting into the high school of choice,
Right.
oftentimes. And so thinking about how can we utilize these video structures here, explain everything, all those sort of apps that are out there that break down these historical barriers to the learning process.
And it's changing so fast. And then finally, interested in social media for networked knowledge and especially knowledge sharing. Like this would be knowledge sharing, like what we're doing.
Now, I think it's brilliant, taking advantage of the moment, but also envisioning sort of the future is now, and how do we leave our mark on history, utilizing this opportunity like we talked about, like you said, through networking, through social media, through digital technologies that exist. We just need to be able to leverage those forward.
Leverage, yeah. Well, great thoughts. I think that wraps it up. And then I'm going to share underneath the video your Twitter so that they can follow us. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Evan.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for the opportunity, Peggy. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too.